Howdy, kids. Welcome to another session of lectures by Lob-EZ. It's a beautiful spring day. It's actually evening. I spent the day doing yard work with Leland, and you know, I got a lot of moles in my backyard, and I had to make war on them, and I had some fireworks left over from the 4th of July, and I made myself an incendiary device, and I blew those suckers sky high. Now, I don't want y'all to think I'm kind of a violent man, because I really am just like a big old teddy bear, but I do abhor those terrible moles that kill my yard, and I don't like them. And I'm not even a big hunter. I don't hunt. I won't shoot a deer. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that do that, but that's not for me. But moles, oh my Lord! Remember that game at the arcade, the whack-a-mole? Yeah, that's what I like to do. Anyway, I digress. We have some work to do. So why don't y'all grab yourself a nice Coke Zero and have a seat and get yourself comfortable and join me as we talk about Chapter 20, Section 1. We're going to talk about imperialism. All right? How you doing, Leland? All right, now. Here we go. Y'all kind of commented that you like this feature as opposed to my PowerPoints, because it helps you get your questions answered a little bit easier and quicklier. That's a word. I just made it up. All right, Leland, go lay down. Go on. So when we talk about imperialism, what we must do is differentiate. See, we gotta talk about how it's different than the type of imperialism that appeared back in the 16th century. All right, the Western Hemisphere, when the Spaniards and the conquistadors came over and they colonized the New World and killed them all with smallpox and whatnot, and then they set up the encomienda system. Well, what we have to do is differentiate it from new imperialism, which is what we see taking place in Europe starting 1870, all right, roughly. 1870 to 1914. Why? Why 1914? Why such a specific date? Well, because that is when World War I begins. All right. The areas that are involved are obviously Europe, and then Africa, and then Asia, because we're going to be talking about India and China as well. So what we're talking about is more complete, total domination of the indigenous people by the Europeans. All right, more social and economic and political control. All right, that they exert over the people of India, China, and Africa, and then they attempt to force European ways upon them. It's what we call assimilation. Yes, it is. In order for the Europeans to be able to get themselves involved in imperialism, there needed to be, well, in order for them to make it lucrative and for them to make it as efficient as possible, they had to have more contact and more frequent contact, and the ability to travel from colony to mother country. And so really the obstacles that stood in the way were transportation. And so if you think back to the 16th century, you had wooden ships that were wind powered, and a journey, for example, from Europe, maybe Spain, to I don't know, like the Bahamas, take several weeks, if not months. All right. So with the advent of the steam engine and the steam-powered vessels, we see that time period is reduced thusly, and the initial steam-powered ships look like, see this little boat right here, and it's got this wheel right here. They got a bunch of giant hamsters. It's like a big hamster wheel, and what they do is they through animal husbandry, they get these big hamsters in here, and then they spin, and then that's what makes the boat go. No, I'm just joshing. But it is a water wheel, and it's not very efficient. But this is an earlier ship called the Great Eastern. All right. And although it is, it's got some masts here, it does have these smokestacks. So it is a steam-powered ship. And what we see with the advent of the second industrial revolution is steel replacing iron, and these ships are capable of being built much larger. And this here ship is about 900 feet long, so that's about 3 football fields to you and me. And then what they do later on is they get in the back. They got the propeller that works a little bit better than the hamster wheel. And so at any rate, transportation was key, but also communication. All right. And so the Morse code telegraph wire needed to be put in place so that messages can be sent from colony to mother country, or vice versa. And so that was quite a endeavor, because what they had to do, you see, is they had to get these big giant coils of wire, and they had to take that out in the ocean, and they had to connect it all, and it had to be dropped all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. And that's like someplace about 60,000 feet. And sometimes that wire would break, and they had the, it wasn't always successful, but I was reading about it. It's pretty fascinating, because what they had, they would drop like these devices all the way down in the bottom, try to recover that wire. And sometimes they were successful, mostly not. But at any rate, what that did was that sped up the communication time between. And so more and more people felt, you know, that there was less risk associated with going to an unknown part of the world, because of the ability to communicate back to the mother country, and with faster transportation, what have you. So that makes the process much better, okay? So what this does here is this facilitates, more colonies being taken, all right? So it also improves trade. But remember, see, imperialism was important because, as I said, with the advent of the second industrial revolution, they had new gadgets and gizmos that required various types of natural resources that were not readily available in Europe. And so they had to look elsewhere to get those things, and especially with the automobile, all right? With the advent of the internal combustion engine, they needed oil, see? And also, well, as urbanization continued, here, see, this is something that's not in the notes. But with urbanization, fire was a major problem because most of the houses were built out of wood, and they used lamps and candles, and that that's a fire hazard. And so what they began to do, well, because there was a need, because they were also running out of the oil that came from whales, because they had overhunted the whale population. Because see, they didn't fish whales, because whales is a mammal. All right, you don't fish mammals, you hunt mammals. At any rate, like when I was hunting them moles earlier. Yeah. Anyway, so when they killed off all the Moby Dicks, they needed another source, and there's this stuff that comes out the ground. It's called oil, and if you take it to a voodoo shaman, he can put a hex on it, and he can make it turn into what you call kerosene, and then you can heat your home and light your home, and I think that actually brought the rate of fires down. But anyway, with the automobile, they obviously needed oil, and you got to drive on rubber tires, and rubber that's a tropical plant or tree, as it were. And so they needed to look out elsewhere. So there was the primary driver, okay, of imperialism is economics, okay? And there are other reasons which we will get into, but so there was, a lot of historians are interested in studying why it was so easy, relatively, for the Europeans to essentially dominate the world. The old argument was that the Europeans was superior, and everybody else was therefore inferior. Well, that is a racist notion that is unprovable. Technologically, they were more advanced, but didn't mean that they are superior anyway. So there's a lot of interest among historians to explain away why there is this tremendous gap between what is called the industrialized world and now they call it developing. In the notes, I have it down there as third world nations, but that for some reason is not politically correct, and it's considered kind of offensive. So the term now that we use is softer and friendlier, and it's called developing. So those countries that are poor are known as the developing world. At any rate, prior to about 1750, which is the Industrial Revolution, there was no inequality between Europe and the rest of the world. Everybody's pretty much equal when it comes to like standards of living. All right. Remember, standard of living is an economic term to describe how rich or poor a country is. But that gap grew and has continued to grow to this day. All right. So there you go. But what we want to talk about as we dive in is China. All right. That's where we begin, because it was in China that the Europeans, the British, first gained more access. They gained more access there than just about anywhere else. All right, so we're going to talk about that. But they had a heck of a time trying to convince the Chinese to conduct trade with them, because the Chinese, well, somebody driving down my street. Oh, it's just neighbors leaving. Anyway, here's the deal. What was I going to say? Oh, the Chinese. Okay, so, they built that Great Wall, and they got invaded. And they didn't like them invaders, because who them crazy people that killed everybody? The Mongols, right? Come out of Mongolia and the swoop down and Genghis Khan, and they killed everybody, and they had the largest, most violent empire in the world. Well, once they finally got rid of them, they decided, the Chinese, that they didn't really trust outsiders, and they were going to have what we call a closed country policy, which would prevent foreign influence. And as it was, the Chinese were also self-sufficient, which meant they didn't need to conduct trade with no outside. They had everything that they needed. And the Chinese considered themselves what they called the Middle Kingdom. All right. Now, that's kind of a racist notion, because they believed themselves superior to everybody else, including the white man from Europe. In fact, they thought that the Europeans, when they first showed up in the 16th century, that they called them a bunch of barbarians, and the stuff that they brought, they considered, well, useless. All right. And they didn't really see any purpose to conduct trade. So there's all these things that are going on behind the scenes. But that the British liked some of the things that the Chinese produced, like silk and ivory. Oh, no, not ivory. I'm sorry. Porcelain. And then they also liked that tea. See, the British, every day they drink tea. All right, that's very important to them. So it's like my Coke Zero to them. But they don't drink it in a big old vat like this, or a tumbler. They drink it in a little, very small, dainty coffee, or like a cup, a small coffee cup. But they loved them some tea, and the Chinese didn't want to conduct any kind of trade. They wanted that tea to be purchased. Well, I'm going to need a refill. So we call it. They had to trade silver for tea. So, silver don't grow on no trees. All right. Tea does, but not silver. See, if you want to come up with more silver, what you need to do is you need to get you a goose, because they got geese that lay golden eggs, and then you just got to get them to eat different food, and then they'll lay silver eggs. But no, just, anyway, so they was running out of silver, and they didn't like that, and so in China, for medicinal purposes, they had been using opium, smoking opium, but it was, for the most part, outlawed, but for like medicinal purposes. So I don't know if you know this, but opium is terrible stuff. It's what they use to make heroin, and what's that, painkiller, morphine, that they give people, the soldiers on the battlefield. It's real powerful stuff, but it's highly addictive. And so the Chinese used the cotton fields in India to begin producing opium. And then they brought that opium over to China, and they used some of their Chinese connections to go out there into the, into the interior, because they were restricted to one trading post in southern China. And that was it. All right. So from there, they were able to sell bazillions of pounds of opium to the Chinese, and they all got addicted to it. And so if you see here, look at all this. All right. Numbers of chests. So 25,000 chests by 1832. So what that means is we're talking about like thousands of tons of opium. All right. And so the Chinese government was highly vexed by this situation. And so the emperor instructed one of his ambassadors to go and to this trading post and see what was the matter, and see if he can convince the Brits to stop selling this god-awful opium. But they refused, and so he also sent a letter to the Queen, all right, herself, Queen Victoria. And in this letter here, he is trying to lay out all the reasons why they should not be conducting that terrible, or trying to sell that terrible product to the Chinese, and that they wouldn't allow their own citizens to consume that stuff, so why should they do it to the Chinese? Well, it fell on deaf ears, and before you know it, a war broke out. We don't need to worry ourselves about battles or who caused it, but we know that the British were successful in defeating the Chinese. See, part of the problem with the Chinese from being closed, they did not benefit from, what's that called? When you get ideas that come from other places, and those how ideas spread and inventions and things like that. It's called cultural diffusion. And since they was closed, they got surpassed. So at one time, they were very technologically advanced. I mean, where I got that gunpowder that I was using from my fireworks to blow my moles to kingdom come, that come from China. All right, so the Chinese and printing, they had before that German feller. What's that guy's name? Oh, good Lord. I can't remember his name. Invented the printing press. Well, the Chinese had done it about 50 years prior. Anyway, what's that guy's name? It'll come to me. Gosh dang. It's terrible. I'm a history teacher. Well, I'm talking about something else, and I got myself all confused. Anyway, the war went badly. So look at this. These are these Chinese. They're called war junks. War junks. All right. Well, after they get blown up, that's all that's left. Bunch of junk. But you can see off in the background there. There's British ships, and they's blasting them Chinese junks to junk. All right. So what happened? Here's the big part. This is the most important part right here. Is the effects. Okay, so the Chinese were first to open up their borders and to more borders or more ports to Chinese goods, and then they had to pay an indemnity, a war debt, and then they had to cede to the British a whole island of Hong Kong, actually to 1997. But anyway, what else? Oh, extraterritorial rights. So that meant that the British officials could move to the interior of China, and they would not be subject to Chinese law. Now, that really made the Chinese mad, all right? Because they didn't like them foreign devils in their country and not being subject to Chinese law. They thought that was an outrage, all right? So we just need to move on, though. All right, talk enough about China for now. Now we're going to talk about Africa, specifically Egypt. All right, now, so what I'm going to do is talk about how prior to 1870, the Europeans, as far as contact that they had with Africa, we could say it was limited to the exterior of the country, all right? Just like in the port cities, all right? That they hadn't moved too far inland, all right? But what I'm going to do is talk about how that changed, all right? And it starts with the Egyptians, all right? Now, the Egyptians were, for a long time, since like the 15th, 14th century, have been controlled by the Ottoman, all right? Now, you may recall when we was talking about Napoleon, how he had invaded it, all right, and that the British was helping the Ottoman defeat the Frenchies, all right. Well, when the Frenchies got kicked out, the Ottoman kind of extended, or I guess, reestablished control of Egypt. All right. Now this is real important because they didn't directly govern it. All right, it was kind of set up, established, kind of like for the Ottoman. The Egypt was kind of like a colony. All right, and they had these rulers. All right, and they were called khedives. Khedives. All right, and like the English translation or equivalent would be something called like a viceroy, like what they had over in the New World with the Spanish colonies. But anyway, these khedives governed, all right, and they was interested in modernizing their country, all right, and building modern ports and cities and a modern army. And so what they did was they started taking loans, all right, from European countries, all right, and they was struggling to repay those loans because their economy didn't take off like they had thought. So what the British wanted them to do is use all that fertile soil right there, right along the Nile River, all right, and start producing cotton, all right, so that they could send that cotton back to England, and then they can, use that cotton to produce things, textile mills. Anyway, it kind of worked out for a while because during the American Civil War, the South couldn't send their cotton to Britain because the North had established blockades around the port cities in the South. And so all the British started importing cotton from Egypt, right? And so business was real good until 1865. What happened in 1865? Well, you should know this. The Civil War came to an end, silly. All right, so once that happened, the price for Egyptian cotton went down, all right? And so the khedives wasn't doing so well anymore, all right? And it was during this time that this French fella approached the khedives, and his name was Ferdinand de Lesseps, and he had this idea that he won't build himself a canal, all right, cut right through Egypt, all right, to connect the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, all right. Remember the Red Sea? That's the one that Moses parted in the Old Testament. Anyway, this new canal, we're going to call it the Patrick Swayze Canal, all right, S-U-E-Z. That's Swayze, so we call it the Patrick Swayze Canal. All right, so this feller, Ferdinand de Lesseps, what he did was he was kind of like the major contractor, all right? And so in 1869, they completed it, all right? And it was about 100 miles, all right, or so. And this canal was a amazing feat, technologically speaking. And remember, we was talking about those steam engines and that they were using to power ships. Well, they was using them steam engines to power these big old earth movers, all right? And so that was what helped them complete that project. But anyway, 1869, so for the British, this canal became super important to them, okay? And see, because they used to have to go around the southern tip of Africa to get to their colony in India, all right? That was about, 12,000 miles, all right? But by being able to cut through the Patrick Swayze's canal, it only took about 7,000 miles, so that was quite a time saver, all right? And so as the khedives continued to have economic woes, the British began to want to protect the Swayze Canal, and so they contacted Patrick, and they went ahead and purchased it, all right, or at least controlling like shares of it. So anyway, this is where the rubber hits the road, kids, because it was this very important investment, all right, that the British and others wanted to protect. So what they had to do, see this right here, this Red Sea, it's real long, okay? And when these European ships, whether they be British or someone else, what they would do is that they come all the way through here, all right? And they come into contact with pirates, okay? Like, remember them Somali pirates a few years ago? And they had made a movie with, what's his name? Who's that fella? He was in that movie, Castaway. What's that movie you like? Tom Hanks. Yeah, Tom Hanks. Remember? Anyway, Captain Phillips or something like that. Yeah. Oh, hey. I thought I remembered that feller's name that invented the, we were talking about earlier. I can't remember his name. Dang it. I had Johann. The heck? Johann Gutenberg. Yeah, printing press. Remember? I told you I'd remember that. All right, anyway, so all them ships are vulnerable, all right, to attack. And so what the opening of Patrick's Canal actually facilitates or causes Europeans to want to extend control, all right, so that they can protect all their investments. And so right along here, called the Horn of Africa, we start to see Europeans start to move a little bit, you know, extending their control, gaining control of the ports, and then moving a little bit further inland, all right? And so that's kind of how it all started, all right? See? Okay, but if you look at this map here of Africa, it's a great big continent, all right? And what you're going to notice is there's all these different languages, okay? And so what that means is there's not a lot of unity in Africa. And although they have a very sizable population, and if they was to join forces, they would be able to resist any kind of European intrusion. But because they is divided, they unable to resist European imperialism, all right, or imperialization. So the weakness that Africa has right here is just that. It's divided, all right? Unable to unite, okay? And then another one is their technology is primitive, okay? And that means superior firepower by the Europeans are going to be able to cut right through them, all right? And then the other thing is they's frequently at war with one another, okay? And so this is something that the Europeans is able to exploit. So what they would do is they would form alliances with enemy tribes to fight somebody else, and then they turn on each other. And not only that, all that constant warfare that was taking place in Africa made it pretty chaotic, all right? And so during that chaotic mess, it's, you know, kind of easy for somebody to move in and take control. Oh, yeah, and then the last one I almost forgot, was right here in Western Africa. This is where the slave trade, the European slave trade that the Portuguese had kind of established, that, you know, the triangular trade going to the New World, that what that did was that kind of stripped the continent of its most fittest members, okay? And so you know, those that would remain couldn't put up the kind of resistance. Okay, so there's that. But for many years, the Europeans could not go much further than the coast. You know why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they have some rivers in Africa that are quite wild. And what I mean by that is they got all kinds of waterfalls and whatnot, and it's kind of hard, I don't know if you ever tried, to row up a waterfall. So until they had the steamboats, little steamboats, they couldn't go very far inland. And not only that, there's all kinds of terrible diseases just waiting to kill the white man when they go into Africa. And that's why oftentimes they refer to Africa as the white man's grave, all right? And the biggest killer was the mosquitoes, all right? And they get them with that yellow fever, but the biggest one was what? What do you call it? What everybody dies. They still die. 1 million people die of this every year. You know what that's called? Malaria, right? And they got these modern day philanthropists who, like charities, and what they try to do is they try to provide all the little children and their families in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, with little nettings that they can put over their beds at night so that the terrible mosquitoes don't get them and kill them. But anyway, they came up with this discovery here called quinine, all right? And what they got it from was a South American tree called a chinoca or chinoa tree. Anyway, they found out that you grind that bark down into a powder, what it would do is if you would mix it in with water and drink it, it would kind of cause the symptoms to keep them at bay, all right? The malaria, all right? And but the British government had a hard time trying to convince their soldiers to drink their daily dose of quinine, all right? So you know what they did to get the soldiers to drink their quinine? They started putting booze in it, and that's the type of booze that the British drink is called gin, and so that's how they made the gin and tonic. And today, if you go buy some tonic water, you probably don't want to drink it though because it's terrible. It's still got quinine in it, and because quinine is real bitter. I don't like gin; it's bad for you. Anyway, what are the tools? Oh, they had all kinds of modern weaponry that the Europeans did. Like, for example, we've talked about the breech loading rifle. Remember the breech, right? We talked about breech babies versus natural babies coming out, right? When babies dive out their mamas, they go feet first, all right? So that's a breech. So breech loading rifles is where they put the bullets in the back of the gun. And then they had these thing called repeating rifles where they could fire more than just a few rounds per minute. And then the machine gun in 1885 by a called Dr. or Sir Hiram Maxim. It was called a Maxim machine gun. 1885. Once they got that terrible weapon, the Africans could not put up any kind of resistance whatsoever. All right, so I think that's about it. All right, let's move on down here. So what we want to talk about is one of the other causes. So we talked about some of the economic reasons for imperialism. Let's talk about religious, all right? Missionaries, all right? Missionaries want to come down to Africa and spread Christianity, all right? Can't blame them. But one of the other things that they want to do is they kind of, and this is kind of racist because they look down upon the Africans because of the way that they dressed and their customs, and they saw them as savages, all right? And they thought that they was primitive, and what they needed to do was lift them up, all right, and civilize them and make them heathens Christians. And then they had to teach them how to maybe take on the European ways, all right? Because this during Victorian England, I don't know if we talked about this too much, but in Victorian England, 1850, post 1850s, the way that the middle class women dressed was, I mean, you know how those women in Saudi Arabia dressed with those burqas where they covered their whole bodies except for their eyes? Well, that's almost how the British women dressed. They were covered from, you know, head to toe, and the only thing that they would show probably is their palms, and even their necks were covered, and they wore hats and everything like that. And so could you imagine a missionary and his wife going into the wilds of Africa, and they see all these bare-breasted women running around? For God's sakes, the women probably got the vapors. And so they thought that was quite primitive, and they wanted to get first thing is they wanted to get them women to cover themselves because they thought that was quite sinful. All right, so the man who's kind of credited with going into the interior of Africa was a Dr. David Livingstone. All right, and he was kind of a part preacher and part Indiana Jones, and so he explored much of the Congo, which is in Central Africa, and he was able to be hired by a newspaper back in Britain, and when he would come back, he would, you know, sell his stories about what he had encountered. And he is responsible for creating a tremendous amount of interest in Africa because it was unknown. All right, it was a mystery. It was a mysterious place. All right, and when he went missing one time, a New York newspaper, I think it was called the New York Herald, hired this man called Henry Morton Stanley, who was a reporter, but also kind of like an Indiana Jones type. And they sent him to go find Dr. David Livingstone. And that's what this quote here, Dr. Livingstone, I presume, is kind of reenacting that that encounter of the two. But these two men helped provide interest, all right? And not only that, but Henry Morton Stanley, the reporter, he was, I guess, his contacts that he had established were co-opted by a king of Belgium. His name was Leopold II, and he is a terrible man, all right? And so what he did is he tricked Henry Morton Stanley into believing that he wanted to kind of fund and back a missionary and humanitarian effort into the interior of Africa to spread Christianity and to provide economic assistance and humanitarian aid to the African people there. But really, what he wanted was remember, Belgium was an industrialized country too, all right, and so he wanted to keep that economic edge, and so they had a lot of rubber trees in Africa, and so he used those contacts of Henry Morton Stanley to come into contact with like 800,000 square miles of territory. It's about the size of the Louisiana territory, all right? And so if you would look at Belgium, like Belgium would fit inside the Congo. That's the area that he was able to I guess, negotiate with the native rulers to gain control of this territory. And Belgium would fit inside the Congo like 80 times over, all right? And so what that did was that made all the other European countries take notice, and they got jealous, all right? And then what he started to do was, it's terrible, all right? He started exploiting them poor people and forcing them. See, the situation in the Congo with the rubber trees, they weren't as abundant as they were in Brazil. All right, there was a different species of rubber tree, and they were very plentiful. All right, but not in Africa. The type of species of rubber tree, they were like spread out all over the place in the forest, and so this is a very jungled terrain, if you will. All right, and so it was quite difficult for the people, the natives, to find, and to get the sap that I think they called it latex, to be honest. And so the rate of production was much smaller than what King Leopold II, and he had privately, from his fortune, funded this colony, and so he was expecting a return on his investment. And when he didn't get that, he began to use punitive measures, extreme punitive measures against the Africans for not being productive. And he believed it was because they were, inherently lazy. And so what they began to do to make examples of Africans to other Africans and to make them work harder was they would begin cutting their hands off. And there were thousands and thousands of Africans who had both of their hands cut off, and that was to be a powerful reminder that you better work hard. And they were spending so much time looking for the rubber trees that they wouldn't tend to their own farms, and so hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Africans died because of the mistreatment of King Leopold II. So this whole period of time is known as the Rubber Atrocities. And that's what you see these two fellows here. All right, these are some British missionaries, and they're quite disgusted. And these two men here are holding up hands that have been cut off. All right, and so these Rubber Atrocities finally were, I guess these stories were leaked to the press, and eventually the Belgian government seized the colony away from Leopold, but the damage had already been done. and other countries were completely outraged. Other European countries were outraged that that had taken place. All right, so right here, the Belgian Congo, that was the first to really gain territory. That's like 1870 in the interior, right? Really far into the interior. I mean, I guess besides the Brits, but the Brits never really took total control over Egypt. But anyway, the country that you need to know, that's the first to really, and they, when they seized the Belgian Congo, that kicks off the scramble for Africa. All right, so from 1870 to 1914, there's pretty much all of Africa gets carved up. All right, in a very short amount of time. And the two countries that have the most territory when the dust settles is France. They got the most, followed by the Brits. Okay, and there's some conflict for land and competition for land that was part of the reason for the outbreak of World War I, actually, which we'll be getting to shortly. All right, look at this here, Battle of Adowa. The only two countries that did not get carved up and imperialized by the Europeans, what, Ethiopia, over here in the eastern part of the Horn of Africa, and over here, tiny little country on the west coast called Liberia. The Battle of Adowa was a very convincing battle where the Italians were defeated by the Ethiopian troops led by Menelik II. Menelik II was the emperor who was able to resist European domination, and he was able to do that by establishing a very large army. He had a standing army of 100,000 men, which was unheard of in Africa at that time. And two, he was able to trade for European weapons. Okay, and so his soldiers had modern weaponry, and that was something that he was able to use to his advantage. All right, and so when the Italians had attempted to move in from Eritrea and Italian Somaliland into Ethiopia, they were unsuccessful. All right, and so this was kind of a big deal because it was the first time a white European nation had been defeated by a African or somebody of color. All right, and so that was going against that notion that they believed that they were superior. Okay, what else we got here? Oh, so remember Leopold when he seized the Congo, that really upset the other European countries because they didn't think it was fair that you could, a little tiny country like Belgium, claim all this territory. And so they, in an attempt to prevent that from happening again, but more importantly, to prevent European countries from going to war with each other because they might be claiming each other's land, they had a conference. And it's funny because the man who hosted it was the Iron Chancellor. Yeah, that's right, kids. Otto von Bismarck, the guy who used blood and iron in war to unify Germany. He hosts like a peace conference in Berlin, and so everybody comes and basically they get out the maps of Africa and they start dividing up the territory and they set down the rules. All right, and they said no slavery, no selling booze or guns. All right, and the other thing that they said, and this is most important, is look, you got to be able to administer to your colony. If you're going to claim land, then you got to have enough boots on the ground that you can administer it. You just can't say, I take the Sahara Desert. All right, you got to have soldiers to be able to do that. All right, and so that was kind of important. All right, and the other thing, though, is when we look at a modern day map of Africa, it's pretty much the same as it was that the one that they came up with at the Berlin Conference in 1884. All right, so the modern day boundaries of Africa are the same as what they were back in 1884. All right, and they did not invite any native or African rulers. Okay, so they had no idea what existing boundaries, what kingdoms, what empires, what tribes existed, and so they just carved up Africa with no consideration. All right, and so the borders, the boundaries were unnaturally imposed. And so today in modern day Africa, we got problems all over the place because in part, like in Rwanda with the genocide that took place back in the 1990s, it was because 2 enemy tribes were put into this country of Rwanda, and when the Europeans pulled out, the country, or the 2 tribal groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, were able to get after each other. All right, and so that created some long-term problems. Okay, and then when we look at this is important, the Battle of Omdurman. The Battle of Omdurman was the Brits against the Sudanese, and this battle was in the 1890s, so it was already after the advent of the machine gun. And so what happened is the Brits completely mowed down the Sudanese. Okay, and it was a feller. Y'all know who Winston Churchill was. He was the Prime Minister of England during World War II. He was there at that battle, and he witnessed the slaughter. And he actually was quite sympathetic to the Sudanese because of they had no idea that what they was getting themselves into when they went into that battle. And the thousands, like 10,000 of them died in just a matter of moments, really, because of the machine gun. But that battle, what that does is that signifies that the Europeans got technological or militaristic superiority over the Africans. All right. This here poem here by Rudyard Kipling called "The White Man's Burden" is well. Remember when we talked about that desire to kind of lift up the African people? Well, Rudyard Kipling wrote this poem, and he's quite a interesting poet. He's got a lot of poems, actually, and one of my favorite poems is called "If" by Rudyard Kipling, and it's a beautiful poem about a father writing a bunch of advice to his son, and basically, if he does all of these things, then one day he will be a man. And I actually like that poem quite a bit. But this here poem is probably the most racist poem ever written, and it's not hateful. That's not what the word racist actually really means. It means that it's a belief that one race is inferior to others. And there's no doubt about it that the Europeans at the time, the Brits, believed that the Africans and pretty much anybody of color was inferior. All right? The Anglo-Saxon race, they believe, was the most superior race that have ever existed. Okay? And he writes this poem actually as a encouragement to the United States as they were trying to take over the Philippines, telling them that they should do it, that it's a lofty goal, and it's honorable endeavor, but it's going to be difficult because once you colonize, you're going to have to lift these people up, and it's terribly difficult because they're savages. All right, and that is obviously the racist notion here. All right, and so that's what that poem is about. And this political cartoon here really, I think, does a good job of kind of illustrating what exactly his words meant. All right, got Uncle Sam and John Bull, those 2 guys. You know, that's personification of the United States and the personification of Great Britain. But like as they bring him to the top of this like mountain here, all these obstacles to get them to civilization. Look at it. There are all these stones. Got oppression, superstition, ignorance, barbarism, vice, brutality. So those are all the things that are going to make it difficult for the white man to lift up these colonists. All right. And one of the men who was probably a Brit who was the strongest believer in empire for Great Britain was the Cecil Rhodes. Okay, and Cecil Rhodes was like I don't know, he was like the 6th of 11 children, and went down to Africa, South Africa, with his brother, who had a interests in a mine. And he kind of grew up, spent a year at Oxford, going to college, but returned to Africa and became quite successful. He was a natural businessman. He was a natural at negotiation and convincing people to give him an opportunity. And he became extremely wealthy, all right, in diamonds and in gold. And he was extremely lucky in the areas that he selected to mine. But when gold was discovered in the Transvaal, which was a territory to the north of South Africa that was controlled by Dutch settlers known as the Boers, B-O-E-R-S. He believed that it was the destiny of Great Britain to take that land, all right? And he had this dream that Africa would be linked, all right, from north to south, from the Cape in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt would be linked together by a railroad, all right? And his hope was that if he could convince the British government to take possession of this area called the Transvaal and take it away from the Boers, that this would, you know, be one more step in realizing his goal. Well, what he ends up doing is triggering a war between Great Britain and the Dutch, called the Boer War, obviously, and it really brings shame to him, and he is humiliated. And but he was also a man that was known to go back on his word. He was an extremely driven man and talented and gifted, but he was also ruthless, and he didn't have many scruples. All right, and so that's the lesson of what you call Cecil Rhodes. All right, want to shift here real quickly, and we're almost finished, kids. Yay, yay! We want to talk about India. All right, so when the Brits came into contact, I mean, you know, holy cow, 1498 was the first time that was the Portuguese da Gama who came into contact with the Indians when he rounded the southern tip of Africa. And from that moment, trade had been established. Well, the Brits was the first to move to the interior of India because they noticed that the governing empire within Africa, the Mughal dynasty, was collapsing, and that there was a oh boy, here it is. It was a power vacuum, or situation where there was chaos because there was, yeah, so what's that rhyme with? Chaos rhymes with anarchy, right? And so anytime there's anarchy, there's absence of power. And so the Brits were able to move in. And also the same way in which they were later able to take over Africa, the Europeans, it was the same way the Brits were able to extend their control over India. And that was because the Indians were divided. They had multiple language groups and the religious groups. They had Muslims and they had Hindus, and they don't much like one another. And so that was a way for the Brits to be able to extend their control. All right. So it was called the British East India Company that establishes control, economic control over much of India. All right. And they kind of took a risk because they hired local soldiers to, you know, protect their investments and kind of be, you know, a force for security. And these fellers were called the sepoys. All right. Now, these sepoys were both Hindu and Muslims. All right. And so the situation kind of goes downhill when there is a new type of weapon that's introduced that's got a cartridge, ammunition that requires you to bite off the tip to get at the bullet and the powder to load the weapon with. All right. But the problem was when they would seal this in these big giant boxes, they didn't want that paper to get dried up, because if that paper dried up, it would get brittle and it will crack open, and then all the gunpowder would leak out, and then it would be ineffective. All right, it would become a useless weapon. All right. So what they did to prevent it from drying out was they would encase this paper with like grease, all right, animal fat that they got from like pigs and cows. Now, if you know anything about Hindus and Muslims, you know that that's kind of a problem, because the Hindus, if you ever go to India, they got modern cities just like we do, but one thing that's different is, like, in the middle of the day, you might be like driving down the road and all of a sudden there's a big traffic jam. And you think, well, what's going on? There was a car accident or something? No, there's a cow in the middle of the road, all right? And just standing there. And they won't do anything about it because they believe them cows would be sacred animals. In fact, they believe that, like, because of reincarnation, that you could actually be reincarnated as a cow. So they won't slaughter cows and eat them. So they didn't take too kindly to these cartridges that got to bite off with their teeth to have animal fat. All right, and then the Muslims would refuse. They refused to, and actually Christians are supposed to not eat bacon or pigs because it's an unclean animal. And if you know anything about pigs, they are filthy, filthy animals. They will eat anything. They'll eat their own young. And in fact, of farmers, sometimes, like, if they go in the pig pen and they fall down and like trying to feed the pigs, them hogs will eat that man. They will eat the farmer. They eat anything. You throw a can of soda, they'll eat the whole can. They're terrible. Anyway, but the Muslims, they were equally upset. All right. So they saw that as a major insult, and so that triggered what was called a Sepoy Mutiny, and they slaughtered a bunch of the Brits. But then the Brits were able to send in reinforcements and then ultimately defeat. In part, they were able to defeat the Sepoys because they wouldn't unite, because they didn't like each other. All right. They hated each other just as much as they hated the Brits. So the Brits were able to reestablish control. And then that period that from 1847, all right, which was when the Sepoy Mutiny took place, to like 1947, or was it 1857? 1857 to 1947, 90-year period where the British government took direct control over India, or the colony, is called the Raj. Got that? R-A-J, Raj. Anyway, yeah, you should be able to figure this one out. Look at that. Look at all the territory at one time that the British Empire had. Boom, 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 boom. All right. So, from a literal standpoint, the globe being a sphere, it's quite possible that the sun would never set. But the other is the figurative, because look at it. I mean, it looks as if, what does it mean when the sun sets on the day? That the day is coming to a close, that the day is coming to an end. All right, so if the sun, what does it mean that the sun is setting on the British Empire? Well, it means that the British Empire is coming to an end. And when it's at its height, it's at its zenith, apex of power, who would have thought that it would be possible one day that the British Empire would cease to exist? So that's what that meant. All right. Now, last question. All right. Last one that we got to talk about is Japan. All right. Now, the Japanese looked as if they was going to follow suit with the Chinese. All right. Because the Japanese had undergone a period known as the Tokugawa Shogunate. And during the Tokugawa Shogunate, there was a closed country period. All right. Where they kicked out all the foreigners. All right. Because Christians were trying to convert everybody to Catholicism, and the shogun, which is the military leader in Japan, got fearful that was going to cause an uprising, so they kicked out all the Christians. In fact, there was a movie that just came out about the same story, about the missionaries in Japan. I forget what the name of it was. I heard it wasn't very good. It was too long. That's what people said. It was a very famous director, too. Can't think of the name of that. Anyway, in Japan, what happened was President Willard Fillmore in 1850 sends dispatches a Commodore, which is a naval admiral type position, officer, to go to Japan with a bunch of gunboats and to bring a bunch of gifts, all right? And the whole point of the mission was to present these gifts to the shogun or to the emperor in Japan, and then in hopes that the Japanese would open up trade with the United States and sign a trade agreement, all right? And then then those gifts would say, this is what we can produce. Like, these are the types of manufactured goods that we can provide for your country. All right, but because the Japanese had been closed off for so long, they didn't have any kind of ability to resist the United States should the United States or some other Western power want to come in there and take over. All right, and so when the Commodore was meeting with the royal officials, he had instructed his gunboats, all right, that had traveled with him to perform some naval maneuvers in the bay, Edo Bay, all right, and shoot off their cannons and whatnot. And that was designed to send a very important message to the Japanese, and that was, if you all don't open up your borders to us, we's gonna come back in force and we're gonna take y'all over. And that's what we call gunboat diplomacy. It's called a veiled threat. All right, and it worked because the Japanese signed what was known as the Treaty of Kanagawa. All right, but in order to prevent others from coming in and taking over, they successfully perpetrated one of the biggest changing events that a country has ever endured successfully. We talk about change all throughout this course and always talk about backlashes. Too much change freaks people out, and then there's like this violent backlash. All right, but Japan was able to completely revolutionize every aspect of their country. All right, in about a 40-year time period, and they go from being a backwards agrarian economy to an industrial country that's modern and has colonies, okay? And that's called the Meiji Restoration, all right? And so they go and send all their diplomats out to all the Western countries, and like the United States and Germany and Great Britain and probably, I guess, Belgium too. And what they did was they studied their government, they studied their technology, they studied their educational system, they studied all of their, I said technology, government, military, yeah. So like 4 things, and then they brought all those and they adopted it all, okay? And then Japan, being an island nation, was short on natural resources like coal and iron, so they began to look to other countries just like the West had done, and they looked first to Korea first to China, then to Korea, and then that led to conflict with both China first and then Russia second. All right, and this is what this little political cartoon shows, that in the Russo-Japanese War, in the world's eye, Russia was seen as a powerful nation, but by the end of it, Japan had replaced Russia, and this, kind of like the Battle of Adowa, was kind of an important symbol that the Europeans were not as dominant as they had projected themselves to be. All right, well, that about wraps it up, kids. So I'm sorry it went a little bit longer than I thought, but I kind of had fun. I hope you did too. Join me next time with Lectures by Lober or something like that. Anyway, have a good night.